I'm going to kick it off with a pretty breezy one. I'd love for you both to tell me, what do you think is the most exciting trend in Canadian fintech right now, and how does your company really fit into that? Wayne, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, I think, a pretty notable trend and one that's relevant to both me and to David is the rise of alternative payment methods. So if I define traditional payment methods as the things we've used for years, right? Like credit cards, cash, maybe Interac in store, those things have been around for a long time. But Canada hasn't really had a lot of other payment methods. And that makes Canada different from other countries. If you look in Europe or Asia, there's a whole proliferation of other ways people pay, right? Whether it's different types of wallets or mobile payments or crypto or buy now, pay later, which is what we do. These things are much more advanced in other countries. And there are a lot of good reasons why consumers and merchants should adopt them. And it's only relatively recently that we're seeing this spread in Canada. So, that's something that we're obviously involved in, and David too.
Yeah, I mean, from Nuvei's perspective, and thanks for having me. There's just so much happening in fintech. It's really hard to pick kind of one aspect, but fintech is really an innovative space. So much happening. Our purpose is really to accelerate a customer's business. That's really what our purpose is. And so, how does that work? That really, how do we give them what they need? And alternative payment methods is certainly, what Wayne said. It's a proliferation that we're seeing increasingly in Canada, but really around the world. And what that means is it really gives the consumer the choice of how they want to pay. Other things that we're seeing from a trend perspective, omni-channel is obviously something that's been around for a while, but I think there's an acceleration there with certainly with the pandemic that's happening. And so you have kind of more the traditional, let's say, retailers or businesses that want to go online. That's certainly a trend, and it may not sound too intricate, but you have to be able to track that consumer across the platform and make sure that experience that they have is unique and seamless for them. There's things like payment orchestration that are also kind of happening in the background. That's interesting, and that really, we want to make sure that merchants convert that sale. Because when someone comes to the website, if it's a website, they want to be able to, make sure that transaction happens seamlessly. And then other things are real-time payments would be another kind of trend that we're seeing. But there's so much happening in fintech. I guess the list goes on and on, but I know we're time limited, so I'll pause there.
No, that was great. That was a very helpful overview. I was actually, in preparing for this panel, I was doing some research and I saw this really interesting report by the Canadian Payments Association, where they were actually showing that if you look at the value of all transactions in Canada, the number one way people pay is actually still electronic funds transfers. That's like wires between two banks. And then the second most popular was checks and paper currency. So good old fashioned cash. And obviously, I think it's a very similar picture here in the US. Canadians are not alone in that. But I guess with that in mind, it seems like we're still really in the early innings of these new payment methods. I'm curious what you guys really think it'll take for this to proliferate around Canada and North America more broadly.
So I'm happy to go first. In our business, we focus more on sort of retail. So retail payments, how are customers paying merchants, whether it's e-commerce or online? And what we see that really signals when a payment method is breaking through and is here to stay is when the largest merchants offer that payment method, right? So, when you look at buy now, pay later in our business, we now in the United States are live on something like 60% of all US e-commerce sales is, what we have access to, whether that's through an Amazon, a Walmart, through our Shopify partnership. And so once something gets put in front of that many consumers, then sort of a certain amount of adoption is inevitable, and then it becomes very well entrenched. So I think that's something that we look for. We don't participate as much in some of the things that you mentioned around, the B2B payments, EFT and whatnot. We're really on the sort of how does a consumer pay for a thing side.
Yeah, we're on the same side. It's more on the consumer facing, and it really the ubiquity of these new, these alternative payment methods. It's really about creating a functional purpose, right? So, and that's really driven on the consumer side. So what does a consumer need? So whether it's, some kind of, credit, like a buy now, pay later type of approach, or security, anonymity, speed, cost, like there's so many aspects that drive it. It has to serve a purpose. If it doesn't serve a purpose, there's other very efficient and effective means, but if it doesn't serve a purpose, it kind of will get lost. So, and people always think about payments. It's, on the way, money on the way in, but there's also, money can flow back to the consumer depending on kind of what the business is. So, I guess those are some of the aspects. Another one is just unbanked, right? People, and maybe it's less relevant for Canada, but certainly in some more developing markets where you think about, people who don't have bank accounts, or even within Canada and North America, where you have younger individuals who want to play video games online, social gaming, and they don't necessarily have a credit card. So those are the kind of the use cases per se that are really driving the growth in alternative payment methods that we see.
Yeah, Wayne, I actually really liked your point about merchant acceptance being such a key role here, and I know that's something that matters to both of you. So, can you maybe walk me through kind of the benefits or the conversations that you guys have with merchants as they're weighing, what kinds of payments should I accept? Like, how do I really know if it's worth the time and money it takes to kind of invest and get this thing up and running on my site or in my stores?
Yeah, there's a few dimensions to it. I think, first and foremost, merchants are looking to drive their businesses, right? So that's accessing new consumers, improving the loyalty of consumers, driving more repeat purchases, improving the conversion of the customers that they're seeing. And I think the evidence is pretty strong that when alternative payment methods are added, there's incrementality to all of those metrics. And it's very measurable, right? Especially with e-commerce. Merchants spend all day long monitoring the entire funnel, and they can see exactly what the impact is when they launch an alternative payment method, whether it's BNPL or something else. And so, I think that's very well accepted, and that's why you see in some countries, 5, 6, 7 types of payment methods in the checkout. They wouldn't be there if the merchants couldn't prove that incrementality. So I think merchants are very focused on that. Also focused on brand alignment. They want to have a user experience through those vendor partners that's aligned with what they're trying to do with their brand and providing the right customer experience. And then ease of integration is always a big one. These huge retailers have a million things that they have on their roadmap. And so if someone's asking them or proposing a new payment method, it has to be easy to stand up to justify the expense. So those are some of the things that we see.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'll add, I guess, a little bit to that is you think about a merchant, especially ones that are driving new consumers, right? The new business trying to drive, they spend a ton of money on driving that new business. So when that consumer comes to the website and is ready to purchase and they have their items in their cart, you want to make sure that transaction experience, like Wayne said, the user experience of that transaction works really well. If it doesn't, that's where things fall apart. And there's several factors that impact that user experience. One is, that they want to be displayed the payment method that they want to see. And so the merchant has to be aware about what their consumers are looking for. The availability, the currency even is important. And then kind of the speed of how that happens, both on the way in and potentially on the way out. So it's really about making sure the conversion happens and that the payment is successful, because the worst thing for a merchant is that you get them there, you bring them all the way, and then something fails at the point of purchase. From a payment perspective, payment should just work, right? It just should work, and it should work in a positive experience for that consumer.
Yeah. No, I've been covering payments for like 7 years, and I feel like only recently did I start to notice consumers will go on Twitter, if a big video game was launching or a new cosmetics line was launching and the merchant doesn't have, buy now, pay later, for instance, consumers will be like, what are you doing? Like, I can't believe you don't offer this. So it's interesting how much that, consumer demand piece is probably catching retailers' eyes. I know they all have big social media teams that are probably all over that. So it's a different world these merchants are living in. They have to really think about a lot. So.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I mean, for years, at least I thought growing up, I thought of payments as just sort of this utility. It sort of works. You don't really think about it. You know who Visa, MasterCard is, but that's about it. Now there's all these different types of methods, different types of customers develop affinities to them. Payment methods have a network around them and a following, like you said. We certainly see that in our space. So the world of payments has become much richer than it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do want to take it beyond payments because this is a fintech panel after all. And one of the really big buzzwords in fintech right now is open banking. And so, for those in the audience that might not be as familiar, that's basically the idea that you as a consumer own your banking data, and you can kind of surface that data wherever you want to see it. Usually through fintechs or even surfacing it in other banks, whatever. And so, I would love to get you guys to talk a little bit about this. I know Canada itself is said that it's going to create an open banking system. So it seems like more innovation is on the way. What do you guys think this will mean for consumers? And can you kind of flesh that out a little bit? Like, what does a open banking system really mean for a fintech ecosystem?
Yeah, I can start. So look, overall, open banking, it's another example of innovation in the space, and innovation is always good. It creates more options for businesses and consumers, likely creates a better experience if it's done properly, and that's a big point around open banking in general. It gives access to finance, so from from an ESG perspective, that's always important. But the key here on open banking is going to be around protecting, like you said, the data and the privacy around the consumer. And then adoption of that also takes time. People are used to transacting in a certain way, and to the extent it's different, and it requires you to put in your personal information, there's always some sensitivity, and so that I think will take some time to adopt. But we've seen it in other countries, that we deal with, where UK is a great example, where the adoption has been quite strong, and so it's working well. And it's really about that consumer journey, and you can call it open banking is one thing. There's embedded finance is right behind it, and that's another kind of proliferation that's happening, where you see kind of finance coming into place in places you may not normally see it. And so it's I think that the adoption will be there. I think it's great to have innovation, and really just about how what will those standards look like, and in terms of protecting and implementing the open banking, at least in Canada.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all that. I think Canada's been talking about an open banking framework for a number of years. It's taken quite a while to get it moving, and I think that's been frustrating to many of us, certainly in the fintech community, who think this is a really good thing to be doing. If there's a silver lining, it's that I think Canada can learn from some of the experiments in other countries where certain things didn't really work, or frameworks have been adjusted after the fact. So maybe we can shortcut to sort of a really effective framework and sort of ramp it up sooner. Right now, the Canadian government is facilitating a consultation process with the private sector. Banks are participating, fintech providers. Affirm is involved in one of those work streams. And so we're sort of hoping to see quick progress through this year on the open banking frameworks, and then we can actually get transactions flowing and business happening before too long.
How important is it to have the traditional banks at the table alongside, smaller startups or more advanced startups like you guys?
I think it's very important to have both groups and others involved. I mean, the banks have a tremendous amount of knowledge, right? When you think about the things that are happening, how do you set the standards? How do you, ensure the privacy? But I do think that having the innovation around with firms like Affirm and Nuvei and many others, having that other perspective is important, because, it is something new. It is something that is very tangential to kind of what we do in our businesses every day, right? So it's something that working together in collaboration will make it a success. Any one party doing it on its own, I think will probably miss something along the way. So I think that consultation process that Wayne talked about is really important, to bring those constituents all together and make sure it's defined properly and implemented properly, because you kind of only get one chance to launch something, and you want it to be done properly.
Yeah, totally agree. It won't work if the Canada's biggest banks aren't on board. I mean, Canada's a very concentrated banking sector. The top 5 or 6 banks have 85+% market share. They need to be on board. They need to be comfortable. And then it's the job of the fintechs and other providers to make sure that it's going to be designed in such a way that supports innovation, that's easy to use, and bring that lens. And then hopefully together we can sort of land on the right balance of everything. User experience, ease of use, accessibility, privacy, security, and it's a system that everyone's happy with, and that Canadians are confident in.
Gotcha. And I guess Do you guys have any, examples off the cuff about what this could end up looking like? I feel like an example I often give folks here in the U.S., at least, is like the rise of the personal financial management apps. We have like Acorns and things like that, where your banking information feeds through, and it kind of surfaces there. Are there examples like that you can give to kind of show people this is what's possible as part of this work?
Yeah, I can go first, David, if you like. I think right now, like if you're a Canadian and you use some sort of service or app in your life, maybe it's like a financial management app or it's a payment product, and you at some point linked a bank account or like entered your bank account password and details and created some sort of linkage or accessed your bank account through that thing. That is the type of thing that open banking will facilitate. However, up until now, it's been kind of done through the back door, through services that are called like screen scraping, where basically some companies have gone ahead and kind of built open banking by leveraging the sort of online banking access that we all have, and millions of Canadians have done that. And we use that in our products as well, and it's very well accepted. But the criticism of it is there hasn't been a commonly agreed upon framework for all those things we just talked about. The API structure, the privacy, the security, and it can be buggy too, because there's not like a common approach, and banks are always changing different things in their system. So open banking is meant to regularize, clarify all of that, improve access to it, and make it a really much more powerful tool for all of fintech and the banks and Canadians to benefit from.
That's great.
Yeah, I would just add, like, I think I won't add anything specific around that, but you think about embedded finance, which is almost like the next step within open banking. And, the example is you go on to buy, right? You go on to buy something. And typically historically, it's like you go on, you buy it, that's it, transaction's done. Now you can go on, you can purchase the item. You can now, through Affirm as an example, you can say, okay, I want to pay for it later. So you can enable that financing aspect to it. Then you can also say, you know what, I bought this, whatever the item is, let's say it's an expensive item, you want to buy insurance on the item. So you can now go and buy insurance through another provider. It can all happen within that one transaction. You're just ticking off boxes, and effectively that happens, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to go finance it separately through another transaction. I'm going to go and then buy insurance because I need it in 3 different transactions. That whole embedded finance concept is something that comes right after this open banking concept.
Gotcha. So it sounds like lots is on the horizon. It'll be exciting to kind of keep and pay attention to it. We have just a couple of minutes left. And so with the remaining time, I'd love to play a game. Wayne and David and I talked about this before, so I'm not springing this on them. So I'm going to give you guys some buzzwords, and I would love to hear, in 20 seconds or less, is it overrated or is it underrated? So maybe for a first one, if David, you want to kick us off, crypto, overrated, underrated?
I'd say underrated. Certainly some downside on the volatility side. Needs to be regulated. Some standards around it. Use cases need to be deployed and brought out. And stable coins, I guess, is probably where the use cases will come out first.
Gotcha. All right, Wayne, I'll throw it at you. How about Toronto as North America's next Silicon Valley? Apparently, New York Times recently reported that Toronto's tech workforce is growing at a faster clip than any other hub. So I'm curious if you think Toronto as North America's next Silicon Valley, overrated or underrated?
Maybe somewhere in the middle. I mean, it's night and day compared to 10, 15 years ago in terms of the tech depths here and the tech scene. But and that's really exciting. It's good for Canada. It's good for Toronto. But there's a long way to go to catch up to what they have in Silicon Valley too.